I was standing outside my parents' living room door, still wearing the black coat from the funeral, when I heard my father say my name, in a tone I had never heard before, flat, calculating, almost cold. My hand froze on the doorknob. My heart was still pounding from the lawyer's words, echoing in my head $30 million. A Miami beachfront property. Everything left to me. I had come home ready to tell them the truth. But then my sister laughed softly and said, "If she got the money. We just need her to trust us, she always does." And suddenly I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Because in that moment I realized they weren't grieving. They were planning. The rain had followed me all the way home from the cemetery, thin and persistent, the kind that soaked through fabric without you noticing. My boots left damp prints across the front porch, as I stood there staring at the familiar white door I'd walked through 1,000 times growing up. Everything looked the same. The chipped paint near the handle, the wind chime my mother never took down, the faint smell of cinnamon drifting from inside. For a second I almost believed nothing had changed. That I could walk in, sit down and tell them everything. That maybe, just maybe, they would be proud of me for once. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced down. It was the lawyer's message, "Call me if anything feels uncomfortable. Your grandfather anticipated pressure." I locked the screen without replying. Grandfather. Even now the word felt strange. To everyone else he had been a distant, quiet man who lived alone and rarely visited. To me, he had been the only person in the family who never asked me why I joined the army, never questioned my decisions, never compared me to my older brother. He used to send handwritten letters while I was deployed, short notes about the weather, the news, and once a clipping about a beachfront property in Miami. He joked he'd retire to someday. I didn't know he already owned it. I didn't know he'd left it to me. I reached for the doorknob again. That was when I heard my brother's voice from inside. She better not have gotten anything. I mean, she barely visited him. My hand stopped. My mother replied, her voice softer, cautious. "We don't know that yet. The lawyer hasn't contacted us." A chair creaked. I imagined them sitting around the dining table, my father at the head, my brother leaning back, my sister scrolling her phone. The same positions they'd taken every holiday, every family discussion, every moment where I'd sat quietly at the edge of the room. Then my father spoke. "If he left her something, we'll handle it. She doesn't understand money. She never has." My chest tightened. My sister let out a small laugh. "She still uses the same bank account she opened in high school. You really think she knows what to do with millions?" Millions. So they were already assuming. I leaned closer to the door without realizing it, my shoulder brushing the wood. My heart was beating so loudly I was afraid they might hear it. My brother lowered his voice. "We should suggest she invest with me. I can say I need capital for the expansion. Family helping family. And we manage the property," my father added calmly, "if there is one." My mother hesitated. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." But my father continued unmoved. "She trusts us. She always has. We just need to guide her." Guide. The word landed like something heavy inside my stomach. I thought about the envelope still in my bag, the documents, the trust, the clause clearly stating the assets were mine alone, protected. My grandfather had made sure of that. He had even included a note in his handwriting, "They may try to convince you. Listen carefully before you decide." My sister's voice cut through my thoughts. "Honestly, she owes us. Dad paid for her college." My breath caught. That wasn't true. I had taken loans. I had worked night shifts. I had enlisted partly to cover the debt. They knew that. They had watched me struggle. Yet now they were rewriting the past as if it had always belonged to them. My brother agreed immediately. "Exactly. And Mom helped with her car. She wouldn't even have gotten to training without us." Another lie. The car had been used, bought with my own savings. I remembered counting cash in my bedroom, terrified I wouldn't have enough. My father exhaled slowly like he was concluding a meeting. "We won't push too hard. Just suggest. She'll fold. She always does." Something inside me went very still. I stared at the door, at my reflection, faintly visible in the glass panel beside it. My face looked pale, older than I felt. There was still a crease across my sleeve from where I'd folded my arms at the cemetery. My grandfather had been buried less than 3 hours ago. And already they were dividing something they didn't even know existed. My phone vibrated again. This time I ignored it completely. Inside, my mother spoke again, quieter. "She's still our daughter. Let's not treat her like—" "No one's treating her badly," my father interrupted. "We're protecting her, and honestly, she's never been good with decisions." I almost laughed at that, but the sound stayed trapped in my throat. I thought about the deployments, the intelligence briefings, the lives that depended on choices made in seconds. But here in this house, I was still the youngest child who needed guidance. My sister asked, "Should we ask her directly?" "No," my father said. "Wait, let her tell us. If she doesn't, then we know she's hiding something." Silence followed. I could hear the faint ticking of the kitchen clock, the rain tapping against the gutter. I realized my hand was still gripping the doorknob. My knuckles had turned white. I had come here ready to share everything, ready to believe for one brief moment that maybe this inheritance could finally make me part of the family in a different way, that maybe they would look at me with respect. Instead, I was standing outside listening to them plan how to take control of something they assumed I couldn't handle. My heartbeat slowed, but only because something colder replaced it. Not anger, at least not yet. Just clarity. I released the doorknob quietly. Then after a long breath I turned it and stepped inside. Their conversation stopped instantly. 4 pairs of eyes looked up at me, surprise, sympathy, practiced sadness. My mother stood first, walking quickly toward me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders. "You're home," she whispered. I nodded, letting her hug me. My father rose from his chair, his expression composed. My brother gave a small, solemn nod. My sister wiped at her eyes, though I hadn't seen any tears before. "Funeral okay?" my father asked. "Yes," I said. My voice sounded calm, too calm. "No one asked about the lawyer. No one asked about the will." "And I didn't tell them." "Not yet." No one asked me what the lawyer had said, but I could feel the question hanging in the air like humidity before a storm. It wasn't in their words, it was in the way my father studied my face, in the way my brother kept glancing at my bag, and how my sister suddenly seemed unusually attentive. They were waiting, measuring, trying to decide whether I was carrying something valuable, even if they didn't yet know what it was. I hung my coat carefully on the rack by the door. The fabric was still damp from the rain, and a faint smell of wet wool rose into the room. My mother moved toward the kitchen immediately. "I made soup," she said too quickly. "You must be exhausted." That alone told me everything. My mother rarely cooked on weekdays, certainly not my favorite. "I'm okay," I replied, but she had already disappeared into the kitchen. My father gestured toward the table. "Sit, we should talk." The same tone he used when I was 17 and told him I wanted to enlist. Calm, controlled, disapproving. I sat down anyway. My brother leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers loosely interlocked. He looked concerned, but there was a brightness in his eyes I hadn't noticed before. Anticipation. "How was it?" he asked. "Quiet," I said. "Not many people." "Did the lawyer show up?" my sister asked casually, as if the question had just occurred to her. I met her gaze. She held it for a second too long. "Yes." My father's fingers tapped once against the table. A small, involuntary movement. "Anything we should know." There it was, direct but framed as concern. I shook my head slightly. He just handed me some personal items, letters, a watch. My brother leaned back, exhaling softly. My sister's shoulders relaxed. My father nodded once slowly, like he was confirming something. "Your grandfather always kept things simple," he said. Simple. $30 million and a beachfront property in Miami did not feel simple. But I didn't correct him. My mother returned with bowls of soup, setting one in front of me. Steam rose in soft curls. I picked up the spoon mostly to give myself something to do. The broth tasted warm, familiar. For a moment, I almost let the comfort reach me. Almost. "So, no estate complications?" my brother asked. I glanced up. "No." He nodded, satisfied. "That's good. Keeps things clean." Clean. The word echoed strangely, as if money would have complicated things, except they had already begun complicating them in their heads. My father folded his hands. "You'll be staying a few days." "A week," I said, "before I report back." He nodded again. "Good. We don't see you enough." The irony almost made me smile. My sister leaned forward. "You know, Emily, you could always transfer closer. There's a base 2 hours from here." I stirred the soup slowly. That's not really how assignments work. But you could try, she insisted. Being near family matters. I wondered if she hurt herself. My brother chimed in, his tone lighter. Plus, you'd save money staying here, no rent, no expenses. You could really build something. Build something. I looked at him. I'm doing fine. Sure, he said quickly. I just mean long-term. My father watched the exchange silently. He didn't interrupt. He didn't correct them. He just observed like he was assessing a negotiation. I took another spoonful of soup. My hand felt steady now. The initial shock from outside the door had settled into something quieter, sharper. I could see them more clearly than I ever had before. Not as villains, not as monsters, just as people calculating what they believed was practical. That almost made it worse. My mother sat beside me. You look tired, she said gently. You should rest. I will. She hesitated. Did he say anything before, I knew she meant before my grandfather died. He said I should take care of myself, I answered truthfully. My father nodded. Good advice. Silence fell again. The clock ticked. My brother checked his phone. My sister reached for her glass of water, then set it down without drinking. They were done fishing for now. I finished half the soup and stood. I'm going to unpack. My mother squeezed my arm. Your old room is ready. Of course it was. She had prepared for me to stay. Or perhaps she had prepared for something else. I walked down the hallway slowly. Every step felt heavier than the last. The house hadn't changed, the same framed photos, the same faint creak in the floorboard near the bathroom, the same narrow window that looked out toward the backyard. But everything felt smaller, like I had outgrown it in ways I hadn't noticed before. My old room smelled faintly of laundry detergent. The bed was neatly made. A folded blanket rested at the foot. My duffel bag sat on the chair where I'd left it last year. I closed the door behind me. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and exhaled. For a moment I just listened, the muffled sounds of dishes clinking in the kitchen, my brother's voice low, my father's deeper tone, life continuing normal, ordinary. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. The documents inside were thick, official, precise. My name printed clearly across each page, the trust structure, the asset valuation, the property address in Miami oceanfront, private access, fully paid. $30 million. The number still didn't feel real. I flipped to the handwritten note tucked inside. Emily, I know your family. I also know you. You'll want to share. You'll want to make things easier for them. But I didn't leave this to them. I left it to you. Use it to build the life you were never allowed to choose. My throat tightened. I folded the note carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Then I heard footsteps outside my door. A pause. A soft knock. Emily, my father's voice. I slid the envelope back into my bag before answering. Yeah. He opened the door halfway, just checking in. I'm fine. He looked around the room briefly, then back at me. You don't have to carry everything alone. I almost laughed at that, but instead I nodded. I know. He hesitated, then added, if anything comes up, financially or otherwise, you can always talk to me. There it was again. I held his gaze. I will. He gave a small approving nod, then closed the door. I waited until his footsteps faded. Then I leaned back against the wall, staring at the ceiling. My heartbeat had finally slowed. The shock had passed. The grief from the funeral felt distant, now replaced by something quieter, but more solid. I understood what my grandfather meant. They hadn't changed overnight, nothing dramatic had happened. But the way they looked at me, the careful questions, the subtle suggestions, it had already begun. They were preparing, and now so was I. I woke before sunrise the way I always did on base, even though there was no reason to. For a few seconds I forgot where I was. The ceiling above me was lower than I was used to, painted the same off-white color it had been since I was 16. The faint hum of the old house heater replaced the distant mechanical sounds I normally heard in the barracks. Then the memories from the night before returned, my father's voice behind the door, my sister's laugh. My brother's careful questions, and the stillness inside me settled again. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet. Growing up, mornings like this had always been peaceful. Before everyone woke up, before comparisons, expectations, and quiet disappointments filled the house. Back then, I used to sit at this same window and imagine leaving. Not dramatically, just quietly, a different life, a different version of myself. The army had given me that. Discipline, distance, a place where I wasn't the youngest, the unpredictable one. The daughter who made strange decisions. Here I was, still all of those things. I got dressed and stepped into the hallway. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. My father was already awake, seated at the table with the newspaper folded neatly in front of him. He looked up as I entered, his expression neutral. "You're up early," he said. "Habit." He nodded once. "Coffee." "Please." He poured it without asking how I took it. He still remembered. That more than anything made my chest tighten slightly. He wasn't cruel. He never had been. That was the hardest part. He just never saw me the way he saw the others. My brother's voice came from the living room. He was already on a call, speaking in a low, urgent tone about a shipment delay. My sister walked in a moment later, tying her hair back, still half asleep. "Morning," she said, glancing at me. "Morning." She poured cereal, sat down, then looked at me again. "You heading back soon?" "In a week." She nodded. "Must be nice, always moving, no roots." I took a sip of coffee. "It's just different." She shrugged. "I could never live like that." My father folded his newspaper carefully. "Stability matters, especially long-term." There it was again, not criticism, not exactly, just a quiet judgment wrapped in practicality. I remembered the first time I told them I wanted to enlist. I had been standing in the same kitchen holding the brochure, my hands shaking slightly. My brother had just been accepted into a business program. My sister was already working at a local firm. I had expected resistance, but not the silence that followed. "You're throwing away your potential," my father had finally said. My mother had asked if something was wrong. My brother had laughed, thinking I was joking. Only my grandfather had said, "She'll learn things none of you ever will." That night I packed my bag alone. The present returned when my brother ended his call and joined us. He looked tired, rubbing his eyes. "Long morning already," he muttered. "Work?" my father asked. "Yeah, cash flow issues." He glanced at me briefly. "Nothing major." I nodded, not commenting, but I noticed the tension in his shoulders. My sister leaned forward. "Did the bank approve the extension?" He shook his head, still waiting. The conversation shifted into numbers, expenses, projections, clients. I listened quietly, absorbing more than they probably realized. My brother's business was struggling. My sister mentioned delays at her firm. My father spoke about rising costs at his own investment. They were all under pressure. I thought about the envelope in my bag upstairs. $30 million. Enough to erase every worry they were discussing. Enough to stabilize everything. I felt the familiar pull, share it, help them make things easier. That instinct had always been there, the desire to finally be useful. Then I remembered the night before. The plan, the assumptions, the way they spoke about me as if I were predictable, manageable. I set my cup down gently. "I'm going for a run," I said. My father nodded. "Good idea." Outside the air was cool and damp. The rain had stopped, leaving the street quiet and reflective. I ran the same route I used to take in high school, past the park, past the closed bakery, past the mailbox where my grandfather used to leave letters for me. My breathing settled into rhythm. Movement always helped me think. By the time I slowed near the park bench, my mind was clearer. They didn't hate me. They just didn't believe in me. And maybe they never had. I sat down, catching my breath. A memory surfaced: my brother's graduation dinner, my father giving a speech about leadership, ambition, success, my sister's promotion celebration, my mother crying with pride. My own enlistment day had been quieter. A handshake, a short goodbye. My father saying, "Call if you change your mind." I never did. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet grass. I looked at the empty playground. For the first time, I realized something that felt both painful and freeing. I had spent years trying to earn something that had never been offered. Respect. Belief. Trust. My grandfather had seen that. That's why he left everything to me, not as a reward, but as protection. I stood and began jogging back. When I reached the house, my sister was on the phone near the doorway. She lowered her voice as I approached. "She's still here. I don't think she got anything," she whispered. She turned and saw me. Her expression shifted instantly. "Hey, good run." "Yeah." She ended the call quickly. "Just work." "Of course." Inside, my father and brother were discussing numbers again. They stopped briefly when I entered, then resumed. I walked past them, heading toward the stairs. As I reached the top, I heard my brother say quietly, "If she didn't inherit anything, we're on our own." My father replied, "Then we adapt." No disappointment, no concern, just calculation. I closed my bedroom door softly. For the first time, I didn't feel hurt, just certain. They weren't waiting for me. They were waiting for what I might have. And now I understood my place. By the third day, the house had settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. My mother cooked more than usual, my father lingered longer at the table, and my brother and sister seemed to orbit me in small, subtle ways. Nothing obvious, nothing that could be called suspicious. But I noticed everything. The extra questions, the careful pauses, the way conversations shifted when I entered the room. They were still trying to read me. So I decided to give them something simple to read. That morning I came downstairs with my duffel bag and set it near the door. My father glanced at it immediately. My brother followed his gaze. My sister pretended not to notice. "You heading out?" my mother asked. "Just meeting someone," I said. Who, my brother asked too quickly. I met his eyes, the lawyer. The silence that followed was almost physical. My father straightened slightly in his chair. My sister's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. "Everything okay?" my mother asked. "Yeah," I said calmly. "He forgot to give me something." "What kind of something?" my father asked. I shrugged. "Just paperwork, personal stuff." My brother leaned back, trying to look casual. "You sure that's all?" "Yes." My father studied my face. I let him. I kept my expression neutral, almost bored. After a moment, he nodded. "All right," he said. I picked up my keys and left. The lawyer's office was quiet, understated, exactly the kind of place that didn't draw attention. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a look that told me he already suspected why I was there. "They're asking questions," I said. He nodded. That was expected. I told them I didn't inherit anything. He watched me carefully, and I'm going to keep it that way. For the first time, he smiled slightly. "Your grandfather would approve." He walked me through the trust structure again, how the assets were shielded, how no one could claim access, how any transfer would require my explicit authorization. Everything was airtight. My grandfather hadn't left room for ambiguity. "There's one more thing," the lawyer said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Your grandfather anticipated pressure. He included documentation showing the assets are already placed in a managed structure. If anyone attempts to influence you, you have legal protection." I opened the folder. Statements, property records, financial instruments, everything in my name but untouchable without my decision. I closed it slowly. Good. When I returned home, the atmosphere shifted the moment I stepped inside. My sister looked up from the couch. My brother stood near the kitchen. My father was by the window pretending to check his phone. "How'd it go?" my mother asked. "Fine," I said, placing my keys on the counter. My brother crossed his arms. "Nothing major." "Number?" My father nodded, once satisfied. "Good." That was all. No follow-up questions. No probing. But something else changed, something subtle. The tension eased. The careful attention softened. The invisible spotlight moved away from me. They believed me. That evening, my brother mentioned his business again. This time, the tone was different, less cautious, more resigned. "Things are tight," he admitted. "But I'll figure it out." My father nodded. "You always do." My sister talked about her firm's restructuring. My mother worried about rising bills. The conversation flowed without circling back to me. I listened quietly. Without the possibility of money, I had become background again. And strangely, that hurt more than the planning I had overheard, because now I saw the contrast clearly. When they thought I might have something, I mattered. When they believed I didn't, I faded. Later that night, my father knocked on my door again. "You busy?" he asked. "Number." He stepped inside, leaning lightly against the dresser. "I just wanted to say, I'm glad you came home, even if it's only for a week." I nodded. "Me too." He hesitated. "You're doing well, right, financially?" There it was again, one last check. "I'm fine," I said. He exhaled quietly, almost relieved. "Good, that's good." He left without another word. I sat on the bed staring at the closed door. His relief wasn't about me, it was about expectations. If I had nothing, there was nothing to negotiate, nothing to manage. Downstairs, I could hear my brother laughing at something on TV. My sister joined in. My mother's voice floated in from the kitchen. The house sounded warm, familiar, peaceful. But now I understood the peace had conditions. The next morning I woke to raised voices, not angry, just tense. I stepped into the hallway and heard my brother speaking. "I need another month," he said. My father replied, "That's not sustainable." "I know, I'm trying." My sister added, "Maybe you should sell the second location." "I can't, not yet." I leaned against the wall listening. Their problems were real, their stress genuine. For a moment the old instinct returned, tell them, help them fix everything. $30 million could do that. But then I remembered the conversation behind the door, the way they assumed control, the way they framed it as guidance, the way they rewrote the past to justify taking something that wasn't theirs. I stepped back into my room quietly. That afternoon my mother asked if I wanted to stay longer. My sister suggested I visit more often. My brother asked about my next assignment. All ordinary questions. No pressure, no calculation. Because as far as they knew, there was nothing to gain. I smiled, answered calmly, and kept the truth to myself. For the first time, I wasn't trying to earn their approval. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was simply watching, learning who they were when they believed I had nothing. And the clearer it became, the more certain I felt. I had made the right decision. The shift didn't happen all at once. It began with small things requests that sounded harmless, casual, almost accidental. My sister asking if I could look over a contract because you're good with details. My brother mentioning his bank meeting and wondering aloud how military relocation allowances worked. My father bringing up investment articles during dinner as if we were simply discussing the news. None of it directly involved money, not yet. But I recognized the pattern. They were testing the edges, probing to see if I might still be useful in ways they hadn't considered. It started on a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting at the kitchen table going through emails from base when my brother dropped into the chair across from me. He rubbed the back of his neck, exhaling heavily. "You ever deal with banks when you were deployed?" he asked. I looked up. "Depends. What kind of situation?" "Just restructuring, short-term liquidity stuff." He shrugged. "Nothing major." I nodded slowly. "They usually care about collateral." "Yeah," he said. "That's the problem." He didn't say anything else, just sat there waiting. I could almost see the calculation behind his eyes, how far he could push without sounding like he was asking for help. "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said. He forced a small smile. "Yeah, I always do." He stood and left. The conversation ended, but the air felt different afterward. The distance from the previous days was closing, not because they thought I had money, because they were realizing they needed something, and I was the only variable left. That evening, my sister joined me on the back porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft orange streaks. She leaned against the railing beside me. "You always seem calm," she said. "Training," I replied. She nodded. "I wish I had that. Work's been unstable." "I'm sorry." She sighed. "They're cutting positions. I might have to move." "Where?" "Not sure. Somewhere cheaper." She glanced at me. "You're lucky. The military takes care of housing, right?" "Sometimes." She kicked lightly at the porch step. "Must be nice not worrying about mortgages." I didn't answer. She waited a second, then smiled faintly. "Anyway, just thinking out loud." When she went inside, I stayed there listening to the quiet. The requests weren't direct, but they were building. Each conversation layered onto the last, forming something inevitable. The next morning, my father asked me to join him for coffee at the local diner. That alone was unusual. He rarely invited me anywhere alone. We sat in a booth near the window. He stirred his coffee slowly. "You've always been disciplined," he said. I nodded. "It's part of the job." He leaned back. "Your brother, he's talented, but he takes risks, sometimes too many." "I know." "He'll recover," my father added, "but it might take time." I watched him carefully. "You're worried." "I'm practical," he corrected. The waitress set down our plates. He waited until she left before continuing. "Family helps family," he said quietly. There it was. I didn't respond immediately, I just cut my toast, buying time. What kind of help? I asked. Guidance, support, stability. He shrugged. You've always been steady. I met his eyes. I don't have anything to offer right now. He nodded quickly. Of course, I didn't mean financially. But the pause after financially lingered too long. We finished breakfast in silence. When we left, he placed his hand briefly on my shoulder. You've grown, he said. I wasn't sure whether that was approval or assessment. By the time we returned home, my brother was pacing in the living room, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was strained. I need another extension, he said. Just 30 days. He saw us and turned away slightly. My father didn't comment. He simply walked past him and into the kitchen. Later that afternoon, my brother approached me again. This time he didn't sit. He stood near the doorway. Hey, he said, random question. Okay. If someone wanted to co-sign something, military credit helps, right? I shook my head gently. I don't co-sign. He nodded immediately. Yeah, didn't think you would. But his shoulders sagged slightly before he turned away. That night, the tension in the house thickened. My sister stayed quiet. My mother hovered between rooms. My father watched everything without speaking. They were all under pressure now. And slowly they were circling back to me, not because they thought I had money, but because they were running out of options. The next morning, my mother knocked softly on my door. Can we talk? She asked. I nodded. She sat beside me, hands folded tightly. Your brother's struggling. Your sister too. Your father's investments. They're tied up. I know. She looked at me carefully. You've always been the steady one, the one who doesn't panic. I didn't answer. She hesitated. If there's anything you can do, even advice, it would help. Advice? I nodded slowly. I'll think about it. She smiled with visible relief. That's all I'm asking. When she left, I stared at the closed door. The pattern had fully formed now. They weren't manipulating aggressively. They weren't demanding. They were simply leaning on me emotionally, gradually hoping I would step forward on my own. That had always been their method. And for years I had stepped forward. But not this time. Because I finally understood something my grandfather had known long before I did. They didn't want me. They wanted what I could provide. And now, even believing I had nothing, they were still reaching. Which meant if they ever discovered the truth, they wouldn't just reach. They would grab. The call came the next afternoon while I was folding my uniform in my room. I recognized the lawyer's number immediately. Something in my chest tightened before I even answered. Emily, he said, his voice measured but more serious than usual. I need to inform you of something. Your father contacted my office this morning. I stopped moving. What did he ask? He didn't mention your name directly. He said he was trying to clarify whether there had been any outstanding legal matters connected to your grandfather's estate. He framed it as family housekeeping. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, and I told him I couldn't disclose anything, but he was persistent. He asked whether any individual beneficiaries had been assigned outside immediate heirs. My pulse quickened, so he's suspicious. Yes, and he may continue digging. I looked toward the door, suddenly aware of every sound in the house. My brother's voice downstairs, the television, the faint clink of dishes. Life continuing, unaware that something had shifted again. What should I do? I asked. Nothing yet, the lawyer replied. You're fully protected, but I thought you should know. Your grandfather anticipated this possibility. He paused, then added, there's also something else. He left a recorded message. It was meant to be delivered only if you felt pressure from family. I closed my eyes briefly. Send it. It's already in your secure folder. After the call ended, I opened my laptop. The file sat there, labeled simply, for Emily if needed. My finger hovered over the trackpad for a second before I clicked. The video loaded slowly. Then my grandfather appeared seated in his familiar armchair, the ocean faintly visible behind him. He looked older than I remembered, but his eyes were clear. Emily, he said, his voice calm. If you're watching this, it means you're facing something I worried about. My throat tightened. I didn't leave this to you by accident, he continued. I've watched how your family treats you. Not cruelly, but carefully. You're useful when you give, invisible when you don't. I didn't want that to follow you forever. He leaned forward slightly. They will ask. Maybe gently, maybe indirectly. They may even believe they're helping you. But this is your life, your independence. Don't trade it for approval." The video ended. I sat there for a long moment, the quiet filling the room. He had understood everything, long before I did. A knock sounded at my door. I closed the laptop quickly. "Yeah." My sister stepped in. "Dad wants everyone downstairs." "Okay." When I reached the living room, they were all there. My father stood near the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back. My brother leaned against the couch. My mother sat quietly. The atmosphere felt heavier than usual. My father gestured for me to sit. "We need to talk," he said. I did. He cleared his throat. "Your grandfather's estate. I made a few calls today." I kept my expression neutral. "There were some irregularities," he continued. "It seems there may have been private arrangements." My brother looked at me. My sister did the same. And I asked. My father watched me carefully. If something was left outside the standard structure, we should know, as a family. The word family hung in the air. I wasn't informed of anything, I said calmly. He studied my face, searching. "You're sure?" "Yes." He nodded slowly, but I could see he didn't fully believe me. My brother shifted. "Look, Emily, if there is something, we're not trying to take it. We just want transparency." "Transparency," my sister added softly. "We're all struggling right now. It would help to understand." I felt the familiar pull again, explain, reassure, share. But my grandfather's voice echoed in my mind. "Don't trade it for approval." "I don't have anything to add," I said. Silence followed. My father exhaled quietly. "All right." The conversation ended, but the room felt colder afterward. The subtle warmth from previous days faded. Suspicion replaced it. They weren't certain, but they were no longer convinced I had nothing. That night I heard my brother pacing again. My sister spoke in hushed tones with my mother. My father stayed in his study longer than usual. They were searching now. The next morning my father approached me before breakfast. "If there is something, Emily," he said quietly, "keeping it from us doesn't help anyone." I met his eyes. "There's nothing." He nodded, but his expression hardened slightly. For the first time I saw disappointment, not because I had failed them, but because they believed I wasn't being honest. And that changed everything. They stopped being careful. The conversations became sharper. My brother's frustration surfaced more openly. My sister's patience thinned. My father watched me with quiet calculation. They were no longer waiting. They were preparing for the possibility that I had lied. And I realized something then: if they found out the truth on their own, it wouldn't be a conversation. It would be a confrontation. The tension in the house didn't explode. It tightened, quietly, steadily, like a rope pulled a little more each day. By the sixth night, no one pretended things were normal anymore. Conversations were shorter. My brother avoided eye contact. My sister watched me in silence. My father spoke only when necessary, his tone measured, distant. The warmth from earlier in the week had disappeared completely. I knew this was the moment my grandfather had anticipated. And I also knew I couldn't leave like this quietly without resolution. Because if I did, they would keep digging, they would keep assuming, they would keep building a story about me that wasn't true. So I decided to end it myself. That evening I asked them all to sit down after dinner. My mother looked surprised. My father immediately sensed something serious. My brother and sister exchanged a glance. We gathered around the same table where I had overheard them days earlier. I folded my hands in front of me, keeping my voice calm. "I need to tell you something." My father nodded once. "Go ahead." I took a slow breath. Grandfather did leave me something. The reaction was immediate. My sister's eyes widened. My brother leaned forward. My mother froze. My father's expression didn't change, but his shoulders stiffened. "I knew it," my brother whispered. My father spoke carefully. "What did he leave you?" I looked at each of them one by one. "A retirement fund and a property." "How much?" my sister asked. "30 million?" The room fell completely silent. Even the clock seemed to stop. My brother's mouth opened slightly. My mother pressed her hand against her chest. My sister stared at me, unmoving. My father remained still, but I saw the flicker in his eyes, shock, quickly followed by calculation. "And the property?" he asked. "Miami, beachfront." My brother let out a soft breath that sounded almost like disbelief. That's incredible." My mother whispered, "He never told us. No, I said quietly. He didn't. My father leaned forward slightly. Why didn't you tell us? I met his gaze. Because I heard you, the night I came home. The words landed heavier than anything else I'd said. My sister blinked. Heard... what? I was outside the door. You were discussing what to do if I inherited something, how you'd manage it, how I didn't understand money, how I owed you. No one spoke. My brother shifted uncomfortably. My mother looked down. My father's jaw tightened. My sister started... planning, I finished gently. My father inhaled slowly. Emily, that wasn't. I know, I said. You thought you were helping. You always do. The calmness in my voice seemed to unsettle them more than anger would have. My brother leaned forward. Look, that doesn't mean we want to take anything. We're just... family, I said softly. He nodded, exactly. I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table. Grandfather anticipated that too. My father frowned slightly. What is this? The trust documents. He opened the folder. His eyes moved quickly across the pages. Then slower. Then he stopped completely. It's locked, he said quietly. Yes? No joint management, no transfers without authorization. He looked up at me. You can't even share it casually. That's right. My sister leaned closer. So, what does that mean? It means it's mine, I said. Silence returned. My mother spoke first. Emily, we never meant to make you feel... I know, I said gently. You just didn't trust me. My brother shook his head. That's not fair. It is, I replied, but it's okay. My father closed the folder slowly. So what happens now? I slid my house key onto the table. I'm leaving tomorrow. My mother looked startled. So soon? Yes. You don't have to, she said softly. I do. My father watched me carefully. And the money? I'm keeping it. The words felt simple, final. No anger, no accusation, just truth. My brother leaned back, exhaling slowly. My sister looked away. My mother's eyes filled slightly, though she didn't cry. My father nodded once, accepting something he couldn't change. You've made your decision, he said. Yes. We sat there for another moment, the silence no longer tense, just heavy with things that couldn't be undone. The next morning I packed quietly. My mother hugged me at the door, my brother shook my hand, my sister whispered goodbye. My father stood a few feet away, then stepped forward at the last second. You've grown into someone strong, he said. I had to, I replied. He nodded. I walked to my car. The morning air was cool, the sky clear. As I pulled away, the house grew smaller in the mirror. Not in anger, not in bitterness, just distance. A week later, I stood on the balcony of the Miami property, the ocean stretching endlessly in front of me. The air smelled of salt and sunlight. The waves moved in steady rhythm, calm and certain. For the first time, nothing felt conditional. No expectations, no comparisons, no quiet calculations. Just space. I thought about my grandfather's words, about the years I spent trying to earn something that was never freely given, about the moment outside that door when everything changed. Sometimes the hardest truth isn't that people don't love you. It's that they only know how to love what you provide. And sometimes walking away isn't revenge. It's freedom. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to choose between family and your own independence, I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from and whether you would have made the same decision. We share stories like this every day, and your voice helps keep them alive. If you want more moments like this, quiet, real, and deeply human, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Let's keep this journey going together. The moment my father hurled my grandmother's old bank book onto the ice, the entire wedding went silent. It slid across the frozen floor like something worthless, like something embarrassing. He didn't just drop it. He threw it hard enough that it spun, skidding under the white folding chairs while guests stared in uncomfortable disbelief. Then he laughed. Trash belongs with trash, he said loudly, raising his glass as if he'd just delivered a clever toast. My grandmother's hands trembled beside me. I bent down, picked up the worn little book, and walked away without saying a word. The next morning I carried it into a bank. 5 minutes later the teller turned pale and whispered, "Ma'am, please don't leave." The wedding had been set on an outdoor skating pavilion in Vermont, one of those rustic venues that tried to look effortless, but was carefully curated down to the lanterns hanging from bare branches. Late October air cut clean and cold across the ice, and my breath fogged lightly beneath my veil. I remember thinking before everything unraveled that it was the first time in years my family had gathered without tension. I should have known better. I stood in my dress, simple, structured, more understated than my father would have liked. He had pushed for something louder, more expensive, something that matched his idea of success. But I'd spent 6 years in uniform. Extravagance felt uncomfortable now. My husband Daniel squeezed my hand as the ceremony ended. He knew the history. He knew my father had never approved of my career in the Army. To him, my commission as an officer wasn't an achievement. It was, in his words, a detour for people who couldn't make it in the real world. He had repeated that line often enough that even relatives started using it. Still, when my grandmother slowly approached us after the vows, the mood softened. She moved carefully across the ice, her shoes gripping the rubber mat laid down for safety. Her gray coat hung loosely around her shoulders, and she clutched a small paper envelope with both hands. I noticed the tremor before anyone else did. "Sweetheart," she said quietly, her voice thin but warm. "This isn't much, but I've been saving it for you." She handed me the envelope. Inside was a small worn bank book, yellowed pages, faded ink, the kind I hadn't seen since childhood. It looked almost fragile, like something rescued from an attic. The cover had been handled so often the edges curled inward. I felt a strange tightening in my chest. My grandmother had never had much money. She lived modestly, quietly, rarely bought anything for herself. Before I could thank her, my father leaned forward and glanced at it. He chuckled. Then he laughed. Not politely, not quietly. A full, dismissive laugh that cut across conversations nearby. Several guests turned. My grandmother froze. "What is that?" he asked, reaching for the book. I hesitated, but he took it anyway, flipping through the pages like he expected to find a joke written inside. "You brought her this on her wedding day." My grandmother's lips parted, but no sound came out. "It's a savings book," she finally whispered. "I started it years ago, for her." My father shook his head, slowly, smiling in disbelief. "Mom, this is exactly what I mean." He looked at the guests, gesturing with the book. "This is the difference between sentiment and reality. She just married into a solid future, and you're giving her pocket change from a relic." Daniel shifted beside me. I felt his hand tighten. I reached out. "Dad, it's fine. I appreciate." But he cut me off. "No, you should understand this. You're not a child anymore. You're an officer now, right?" He smirked. "You should know what real value looks like." He tossed the bank book lightly once in his hand as if weighing it. Then with sudden force he flung it across the ice. It slid hard, spinning, stopping near the edge of the rink. "Trash belongs with trash." The words echoed in the cold air. Someone coughed. Another guest looked away. My grandmother's shoulders folded inward like something fragile had finally cracked. I didn't speak. I walked across the ice, my heels careful, deliberate. I picked up the bank book. It was colder now, the paper stiff. I brushed a small frost line off the cover. When I turned back, my father had already lifted his champagne glass again, smiling as if nothing had happened. I didn't return to the center. I didn't finish the reception. Daniel followed me quietly as I stepped off the ice and removed my veil. "You okay?" he asked gently. I nodded. "I just need some air." We drove back to the hotel in silence. My grandmother hadn't left yet. I'd seen her sitting alone near the heaters, staring at her hands. I planned to call her later, but something about the book kept pulling my attention. I opened it again in the car. The entries were handwritten, dated decades back. Small deposits at first, then slightly larger ones. The ink changed color over time. It wasn't much, at least not at first glance. Daniel glanced over. "Looks old." "It is." I ran my thumb over the first entry. "She started this before I was even born." "You going to deposit it?" "Maybe," I said. "I don't know." But that night I couldn't sleep. The scene replayed in my mind, not the insult, but my grandmother's face. She hadn't looked embarrassed. She'd looked worried, as if she'd hoped I would understand something. The next morning I dressed simply and drove to a local branch listed on the front of the book. It was small traditional dark wood counters, quiet carpet, the kind of bank that still printed receipts on thick paper. I slid the book to the teller. "Hi, I'd like to check this account." She smiled politely, opened it, and typed the number. Her expression changed almost instantly. She stopped typing. Then she looked at me. Then back at the screen. "Just a moment," she said softly. She stood and walked to the back office. A minute later, a manager came out. They whispered. The manager looked at me, then at the book, then at the screen again. He approached carefully. "Ma'am," he said, his voice lower now, "could you please come with me?" I blinked. Is something wrong? He shook his head quickly. "No, not wrong, just please." They led me into a private room. The teller brought water. The manager sat across from me, opening the book again as if confirming something. His face had gone pale. He picked up the phone, dialed a number, and spoke quietly. I caught only fragments. "Yes, she's here. Yes, the original. I understand." He hung up. Then he looked at me. "Ma'am," he said gently, "please don't leave." The manager didn't sit immediately after saying it. He remained standing, one hand still resting on the back of the chair across from me as though he were steadying himself. That alone told me this wasn't about a clerical error. Bank managers didn't look unsettled over small balances. "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "Did something go wrong with the account?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. Nothing is wrong." He paused, choosing his words with precision. "But this account requires verification before we proceed." The teller placed a glass of water in front of me. Her hands were steady, but her eyes flicked repeatedly to the bank book like she was trying not to stare. The manager opened the cover again, running his finger along the faded account number, as if confirming its existence for the third time. "How did you come into possession of this?" he asked. "My grandmother gave it to me yesterday," I said. "At my wedding." His brows drew together. "Your grandmother?" "Yes, her name is Margaret Halpern." He inhaled slowly, then typed something into his tablet. Another pause. The silence stretched long enough that I could hear the faint ticking of a wall clock behind me. Finally, he nodded once, almost to himself. "That aligns," he murmured. "Aligns with what I asked." He hesitated. "This account hasn't been accessed in person for quite some time." "How long?" He looked at the screen again. 41 years. I blinked. "That can't be right." "It appears to be correct," he said gently. "There have been internal movements, interest accruals, and linked deposits, but no in-person withdrawal requests. No closures, no ownership disputes, just continuity." I leaned forward. "So it's just a savings account?" He didn't answer immediately. "Technically," he said at last, "yes, but not a standard one." He tapped the page. "Do you see this code here? This small notation beside the original opening date?" I squinted. It looked like a stamped letter followed by numbers. "That designation means the account is attached to a legacy structure," he explained. "These were common decades ago, but most were converted or closed. This one wasn't." "What does that mean?" "It means the funds inside aren't just sitting in a standard savings pool. They've been managed, conservatively, quietly, over time." My stomach tightened. "Managed how?" "Through long-term instruments," he replied. "Bond ladders, dividend reinvestments, trust-linked growth allocations. The kind of structure typically used when someone intends the account to exist for generations." I sat back slowly. My grandmother never mentioned anything like that. "That's not unusual," he said. "Accounts like this were often set up privately." The teller returned with a folder and handed it to him. He opened it, flipping carefully through printed pages. His expression grew more serious. "I'm going to ask you something," he said. "Has anyone else in your family mentioned this account to you?" "Number." "Has anyone attempted to claim it?" "Number." "Has your grandmother ever discussed investments, business holdings, trust funds?" I almost laughed. My grandmother clips coupons. She still uses a landline. She's never talked about investments. He nodded slowly, as if that somehow confirmed something. He turned the folder toward me but didn't slide it across yet. "We're required to confirm identity before disclosing full details. May I see your ID?" I handed him my driver's license. He compared the names carefully, then typed again. The teller remained silent, watching. Another long pause. Then he exhaled. All right, he said softly. I can confirm you are listed as the primary beneficiary. Beneficiary, my voice sounded smaller than I intended. Yes. Of what exactly? He slid the folder toward me. The first page contained the account summary. The second listed deposit history, dozens of entries spanning decades. Small amounts at first, then larger, then periodic automated allocations. My eyes moved downward trying to locate the balance. I found it. Then I looked again. The number didn't make sense. I assumed I'd misread the commas. I counted again, then again. This can't be right, I whispered. The manager didn't correct me. Instead, he folded his hands calmly. The account has been compounding for over 4 decades. It also includes linked instruments that matured at various intervals. Additionally, there are dividend reinvestments from attached holdings. I looked up. You're telling me my grandmother put this much money away? Not all at once, he said. But over time, yes. And importantly, she structured it so it would not be accessed prematurely. I stared at the figure. My mind tried to connect it with reality, my grandmother's small house, her second-hand coats, her quiet life. This doesn't match her life, I said. That happens sometimes, he replied. Some people invest quietly. But why give it to me now? He turned another page. Because the account had release conditions. Release conditions? Yes. The funds transfer to the beneficiary under one of 3 triggers. He tapped the list. Age threshold, marriage, or written directive from the account holder. I swallowed. Marriage. He nodded. Yes, yesterday would qualify. The room felt suddenly smaller. And it's all mine, I asked carefully. Not automatically, he said, but you are the designated owner once we complete verification. He picked up the phone again. We're contacting our senior account office. This type of legacy structure requires executive-level authorization before funds are moved. My hands rested on the table. They didn't feel like mine. Outside the glass wall, the bank continued quietly, customers lining up, printers humming. But inside the room, time felt suspended. After a moment, I asked, "Has anyone else been notified?" He hesitated. "There is a secondary contact listed," he admitted. My stomach tightened. Who? He checked the screen. Then his expression shifted slightly. "It appears to be your father." I stared at him. "What?" The account documentation lists him as a family reference, not a beneficiary, just a notification contact if ownership changes. I leaned back slowly. The manager added carefully, "Our system may automatically generate a call for verification purposes." My chest tightened. I pictured my father laughing on the ice, throwing the book, calling it trash. "When will that call happen?" I asked. He glanced at the phone. I believe he said quietly it may have already begun. The first thing I noticed after the manager said my father's name was how carefully he avoided watching my reaction. He lowered his gaze to the paperwork, straightened the stack, and aligned the edges as if precision could soften the weight of what he'd just revealed. The teller quietly stepped out, closing the door with gentle discretion. For a moment it was just the ticking clock again and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. "My father didn't know about this," I said finally. "That's common," the manager replied. "Being listed as a reference doesn't necessarily imply awareness. It's often just a documentation requirement." I nodded, but something inside me tightened. My grandmother had never done anything casually. If she listed my father, it was deliberate. She knew exactly what she was doing. "Can you tell me when this account was opened?" I asked. He flipped to the first page, November 1979. I did the math quickly. That's before my parents even met. "Yes," he said, "and the original depositor is listed solely as Margaret Halpern." "That was before she moved in with us," I murmured. "Before my father started managing her finances." The manager glanced up. "Managing?" "He used to say she needed help, said she wasn't good with money. He consolidated her accounts years ago." The manager's expression didn't change, but I saw something sharpen behind his eyes. "This account," he said carefully, "appears to have remained outside that consolidation." I leaned forward, "So she hid it." He chose his words carefully. "She preserved it." That phrasing landed differently. Preserved, not hidden, not secret, intentional. He slid another sheet toward me. "These are the early deposits." I studied them. The first entries were small, $25, $40, $60, weekly, sometimes monthly. The handwriting varied slightly, but it was always neat. Then a few years later, the pattern changed. Larger amounts appeared, not massive, but noticeable. "What happened here?" I asked, pointing to a jump in the late 80s. The manager checked the notes. It appears the account was linked to a certificate ladder at that time. That would have increased contributions automatically. She never told anyone. Many people didn't, he said, particularly those who didn't want expectations placed on them. I thought about my grandmother's quiet habits, her insistence on paying cash, her reluctance to discuss finances the way she waved off offers to help. It hadn't looked like secrecy. It had looked like stubborn independence. Another page caught my eye. "What's this?" I asked. He leaned over. That's when the account became trust-linked. In plain English, it means the money stopped being treated like a simple savings balance. It became part of a protected structure, restricted access, designated beneficiary, and managed growth. So she planned this for decades? Yes. The realization settled slowly. This wasn't an impulsive gift. It wasn't sentimental pocket money. It was a long, deliberate act of faith. "She always said I was the only one who listened to her," I said quietly. The manager didn't respond, but his silence felt respectful rather than awkward. My phone buzzed. The sound cut sharply through the room. I glanced down. My father's name filled the screen. I stared at it. The manager noticed. "You don't have to answer immediately." But I knew if I ignored it, he'd keep calling. I answered. "Where are you?" my father demanded without greeting. "At a bank." "What bank?" "A local branch." Why, his tone sharpened. "Did someone call you?" I hesitated. "They called you?" "Yes," he snapped. "Somebody from a bank asking about your grandmother. What is this about?" I looked at the manager. He kept his eyes on the paperwork, giving me space. "I brought in the savings book she gave me yesterday," I said. There was a pause. Then a short laugh. "That thing, you're wasting time on that." "They asked me to stay." Another pause, longer this time. "What do you mean, stay?" "They're verifying the account." My father's voice shifted slightly. "It's probably closed, or inactive. Those old books don't mean anything." "That's not what they said." Silence again. Then more carefully, "What did they say?" I glanced at the folder. "They said I'm listed as beneficiary." The line went quiet. I could hear him breathing. "That's not possible," he said finally. "It is." "No, your grandmother didn't have anything like that. I handled her finances for years." The manager looked up at that just briefly. "They said it's been active for decades," I continued. My father's tone hardened. "Put them on the phone." I lowered the phone slightly. "He wants to speak with you." The manager nodded, accepting the call politely. "This is Daniel Reeves, branch manager." He listened silently for a moment. Then his voice remained calm. "Yes, sir. I understand. No, sir, you are not listed as beneficiary." "Correct. Yes, I can confirm that. No, I cannot disclose the balance without the account holder's authorization." Another pause. "Yes, sir, the account holder is present." He handed the phone back. My father's voice was different now, lower, tighter. "How much is in there?" "I don't know yet," I said. "That's not what he told me." "He didn't tell me either." "Ask him." "I will." Another pause. Then he said quietly, "Don't sign anything." "I'm not signing anything." "I'll be there in an hour." "You don't need to." "I'm coming," he said, and hung up. I lowered the phone slowly. The manager folded his hands again. "Your father seems concerned." "That's not the word I'd use." He nodded. A few minutes later, another knock came at the door. A woman in a dark suit entered carrying a sealed envelope. She handed it to the manager. He opened it carefully, scanning the contents. His expression changed again, subtle but unmistakable. He looked at me. "Ma'am," he said gently, "there's something else you should know." He didn't speak immediately after saying it. Instead, he closed the envelope halfway, as if measuring how much of the truth to release at once. I noticed the paper inside wasn't printed on standard bank stationery. It carried a watermark, older formal, the kind used for legal trust documentation. "What is it?" I asked. "This account," he said slowly, "is not only long-term managed, it's attached to an underlying asset structure." I frowned, meaning... He slid one sheet out and turned it toward me. When your grandmother opened the account, she didn't just deposit cash. She also transferred something else into the structure. Something else? Yes. He tapped the document. Equity. The word felt abstract for a second, then it landed. Equity in what? He scanned the page again. A private industrial fund. It later converted into publicly traded holdings in the late 1980s. The original position was small, but it was never liquidated. Dividends were reinvested automatically. I tried to follow, so, stocks. In simplified terms, yes, but long held, compounding. My chest tightened. You're saying she bought shares decades ago? Yes, and never sold them. That appears to be the case. I looked back at the number I'd seen earlier. Suddenly it made more sense, still shocking, but no longer impossible. What company? I asked. He hesitated. Several now. The original fund diversified over time. Utilities, infrastructure, manufacturing, conservative long-term growth. My grandmother, who clipped coupons and reused tea bags, had quietly built a portfolio. It didn't fit. And yet somehow it did. She had always believed in patience, in slow things, in not drawing attention. Why wasn't this closed when my father consolidated her finances? I asked. The manager folded the document carefully, because it wasn't accessible. This structure required the original account holder's authorization and later the beneficiaries. No one else could move it. So even if he tried, he wouldn't have been able to. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The manager continued, "There's also a letter attached." A letter. Yes, handwritten, from your grandmother. He slid another page toward me. The paper was slightly yellowed. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, careful, rounded, steady despite age. I read silently. If you are holding this, it means I am either gone or I trusted you enough to give this to you myself. I know this book doesn't look like much. That is why I kept it that way. People ignore small things. They overlook quiet things. They underestimate patience. I paused, my throat tightening. You were always the only one who sat with me when everyone else was busy. You listened when I repeated stories. You asked about my life before I was just grandma. You never laughed at my habits. You never made me feel small. So I saved this for you. Not because you need money, but because I want you to have something that belongs only to you. Something no one else can take control or diminish. If anyone tells you it is worthless, remember the quietest things often grow the longest. I lowered the paper slowly. The room blurred for a moment. I blinked, steadying myself. The manager waited respectfully. She wrote this years ago, I asked. He nodded. It appears to have been filed when the trust conditions were finalized. I traced the last line with my finger. Something no one else can take. My phone buzzed again. My father. I let it ring once before answering. I'm 10 minutes away, he said. No greeting again, just urgency. You don't have to come, I replied. I'm coming. It's already being handled. That's exactly why I'm coming, he snapped. Then quieter, did they tell you the amount? Number. Did they tell you anything else? I hesitated. They said it's linked to investments. Silence. Then that doesn't make sense. That's what they said. I told you your grandmother didn't have investments. I reviewed everything. Apparently not everything. He exhaled sharply. Don't let them transfer anything yet. They're not. Good, wait for me. He hung up again. I set the phone down. The manager glanced at the door. He seems eager. That's one way to put it. Another knock sounded. The teller returned, whispering something to him. He nodded, then looked at me. Our senior office confirmed the valuation range, he said carefully. My pulse quickened. And he hesitated, then spoke softly. It's significantly higher than the preliminary balance. How much higher? He took a breath. Several times. I stared at him. Because the equity portion wasn't fully reflected in the initial summary. It required manual reconciliation. The number in my head shifted, expanded, became harder to grasp. And once we finalize, he continued, the ownership transfers fully to you. Outside the glass wall, the front doors opened. The teller glanced toward the lobby. That may be him, she murmured. I turned. Through the glass, I saw my father striding across the floor, coat still unbuttoned, expression tight with controlled urgency. He scanned the room, spotted me, and walked faster. He looked nothing like the man who laughed on the ice. My father didn't knock before entering the private office. He pushed the door open with the same quiet authority he used in boardrooms, the kind that assumed the room already belonged to him. His coat hung half off one shoulder, and his hair, normally meticulous, was slightly out of place, as if he'd driven faster than usual. He stopped just inside the doorway, eyes flicking from me to the manager, then to the folder on the table. So he said, forcing a thin smile, "This is what all the excitement is about." The manager stood politely. "Sir, I'm Daniel Reeves." My father shook his hand briefly, already turning his attention to the paperwork. "I'm her father. I'd like to understand what's going on." "Of course," the manager replied evenly. "However, I should clarify that your daughter is the account holder." "Yes," my father said quickly, "but I'm listed as a family contact." "That's correct," the manager acknowledged. "For notification purposes only." My father nodded, but I saw the faint tightening in his jaw. He pulled out a chair and sat down without being invited. "Then notify me," he said. "What's in the account?" The manager glanced at me. I nodded slightly. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I wanted to see my father's reaction in real time. "The account originated in 1979, the manager began calmly. It was structured with long-term savings later linked to managed equity holdings. The beneficiary, your daughter, became eligible upon marriage." My father waved a hand. Yes, I understand the structure. What's the value?" The manager didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slid the updated summary across the table. My father leaned forward. His eyes moved quickly, then stopped. He blinked. Then he leaned closer. For a moment, he didn't speak. The silence stretched long enough that I could hear his breathing change. That can't be correct," he said quietly. "It has been verified by our senior office," the manager replied. My father looked again, counting the digits under his breath. His fingers hovered over the paper but didn't touch it. "How long has this been here?" he asked. "Over 4 decades. And no one informed the family." The account holder maintained privacy. He sat back slowly. The confidence he carried into the room didn't disappear, but it shifted. Became more careful, more calculating. "This is family money," he said finally. The manager didn't respond. My father turned to me. "Your grandmother must have intended this for all of us." I held his gaze. "She named me." "She named you as beneficiary," he corrected. "That doesn't mean she didn't expect you to share." I said nothing. He leaned forward again, voice softer. "Listen, your grandmother lived with us for years. I supported her, managed her expenses. This," he tapped the paper lightly, "this came from family resources." The manager spoke gently. "Sir, the deposit history indicates independent contributions." My father's eyes flicked to him. "You're saying she did this alone?" "That appears to be the case." "That's impossible." The manager remained calm. "The documentation is clear." My father exhaled slowly. His tone shifted again, less confrontational, more persuasive. "Honey," he said to me, "this is unexpected. We should handle it carefully. Move it into a family trust. That way it's protected." Protected. The same word my grandmother used, only it sounded different in his voice. "It's already protected," I replied. "Yes, but not from taxes. Not from mismanagement. You don't deal with large portfolios." "I deal with logistics and command structures," I said quietly. "I think I can manage a bank account." He forced a chuckle. "This isn't a checking account. This is significant." The manager added gently, "We do provide advisory services if she chooses." My father leaned back, studying me. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Not fear, he didn't scare easily, but the realization that control was slipping. "Did she leave any instructions?" he asked. The manager looked at me. I slid the handwritten letter across. My father read it silently. Halfway through, his expression hardened. He finished, then set the paper down carefully. "She always favored you," he said. "She trusted me." "That's not the same thing." "It is to her." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You're making this emotional. This is financial, strategic. Think long-term." I thought about the ice, about the way he threw the book, about my grandmother's trembling hands. "I am thinking long-term," I said. The manager cleared his throat gently. "There is one more detail." Both of us looked at him. The equity portion includes voting shares, he explained. Not controlling interest, but enough to qualify for annual disclosures. My father frowned. Voting shares in what? The manager named the company. My father froze. I recognized the name instantly, too. It was the same mid-sized infrastructure firm my father had invested in years ago. He'd talked about it at dinner, called it Stable Predictable, a cornerstone holding. You're saying she owned shares in that, he asked. Yes. How many? The manager gave a figure. My father went very still. That's not minor, he said quietly. No, sir. He looked at me again differently this time. Not just as his daughter, but as someone who now sat across from him in the same financial space. We should discuss this privately, he said. We are discussing it, I replied. His eyes narrowed slightly. Then he leaned back, forcing composure. Fine, let's proceed carefully. But the calm tone didn't hide the shift. He wasn't dismissing the bank book anymore. He was calculating around it. The room grew quieter after that. My father didn't speak immediately, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he seemed to be thinking rather than directing. He folded his hands, studying the documents as though he were recalculating something in real time. The manager gave us space, closing the folder gently, but not removing it from the table. Where are the shares held? My father asked finally. Within the legacy trust structure, the manager replied. They transfer with the account once ownership is finalized. And when would that be? Today, pending signatures. My father's eyes flicked to me. We shouldn't rush. It's been 40 years, I said. I don't think today counts as rushing. He exhaled slowly. You're not seeing the bigger picture. Once this moves, it's irreversible. That's the point. He leaned forward, voice softening. Listen, this changes things. For all of us. You don't want to make decisions while emotions are high. I didn't answer. Instead, I picked up my grandmother's letter again. The paper felt warmer now, as if it had absorbed something from the room. My father watched me. Your grandmother wasn't a financial strategist, he said carefully. She wouldn't have understood the implications. The manager spoke quietly. Sir, the documentation suggests she worked with advisors when the trust was created. My father's jaw tightened. Advisors she never mentioned. That's not unusual. He leaned back again, but the calm looked practiced now. Then at least we should meet with my attorney. She already has representation through the trust, the manager replied. My father's eyes narrowed. You're saying I have no role in this? I'm saying the structure doesn't require one. The words landed gently but firmly. My father looked at me again. You realize what this means, don't you? This isn't just money. This is influence. Board disclosures. Shareholder meetings. You'll be stepping into a space you've never navigated. I've stepped into worse, I said quietly. He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, as if accepting something he didn't like. Fine, he said. But before you finalize, I want clarity on tax exposure, liquidity, and long-term allocation. The manager slid another sheet forward. We prepared a preliminary breakdown. My father scanned it quickly. You're suggesting partial retention. That's one option. He glanced at me. You should keep the shares. They're stable. It was the first time he'd given advice instead of resistance. I noticed, the manager continued, there's also a note regarding voting rights. My father looked up sharply. What about them? They're inactive until ownership transfers. After that, she'll receive annual materials. He nodded, slowly absorbing it. The shift in the room wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like a current changing direction. My father wasn't dismissing the account anymore. He wasn't mocking it. He was adapting to it. And that somehow felt heavier than anger. All right, he said at last. What's required? The manager turned the folder toward me. Just signatures acknowledging transfer of ownership and acceptance of trust conditions. I read carefully. The language was formal but clear. Ownership, beneficiary, full transfer. My father watched every line my eyes moved across. Take your time, he said. I did. When I finished, I picked up the pen. For a second, I hesitated, not because I doubted the decision, but because I realized what it symbolized. The book he'd called trash, the gift he'd thrown away, the quiet decades my grandmother had invested without anyone noticing. I signed. The manager countersigned, then stamped the document. The sound was soft but final. It's done, he said. My father exhaled slowly, as if something invisible had settled. What happens now, he asked. The assets transfer under her name, the manager replied. We'll schedule advisory follow-up, but ownership is complete. My father nodded. Then he leaned back in his chair, studying me again. Not with surprise this time, but with a measured, almost respectful caution. Well, he said quietly, I suppose congratulations are in order. It wasn't warm, it wasn't cold, it was careful. I folded my grandmother's letter and slipped it back into the bank book. For a moment no one spoke. Then my father stood. We should talk later, he said. Privately. Maybe, I replied. He nodded once and turned toward the door. Before leaving, he paused, glancing back at the worn bank book in my hands. His expression flickered, brief, unreadable, then settled again into composure. When the door closed behind him, the manager looked at me gently. How are you feeling? I thought about the ice, the laughter, the way the book slid across the rink. I think I said slowly, I understand my grandmother now. He smiled softly. She planned well. I nodded, holding the book carefully. It didn't look different. Still worn, still quiet, still easy to underestimate. But everything around it had changed. My father waited for me in the lobby, standing near the tall windows that looked out over the parking lot. When I stepped out of the private office, he straightened, adjusting his coat as if preparing for a formal meeting rather than a family conversation. For a moment we simply looked at each other, two people who had just crossed an invisible line neither of us had expected that morning. You handled that quickly, he said. It's been 40 years, I replied. He gave a faint smile. You keep saying that. Because it matters. We walked outside together. The late morning sun had warmed the asphalt, melting the thin frost that still clung to the edges of the lot. My breath no longer fogged in the air. It felt strangely symbolic, as if the cold from yesterday had finally broken. I didn't realize she had something like that, he said more quietly now. I don't think she wanted anyone to. He nodded, hands in his coat pockets. She always had her own way. We stood beside my car. He looked at the bank book in my hand again. You know, he said slowly, when she moved in with us, I thought I was helping her. She insisted on paying for groceries sometimes, small amounts. I told her not to worry about it. He paused. I didn't realize she was still building something. She wasn't building it for you, I said gently. He absorbed that without argument. I shouldn't have thrown it, he admitted after a moment. The words surprised me, not because he apologized, but because he said it plainly. No, I agreed, you shouldn't have. He nodded again. I assumed it was symbolic, sentimental. I didn't think... He let the sentence trail off. That it mattered. Yes. We stood in silence. A car passed slowly behind us. Somewhere a phone rang inside the bank. I embarrassed her, he said finally. I remembered my grandmother's hands shaking the way she'd looked down at the ice. Yes, I said quietly. He inhaled, then exhaled slowly. I'll call her. You should. He hesitated. Will she know about this? I think she always knew it would happen eventually. He studied the ground for a moment, then looked up again. You're going back to Vermont. Later today. He nodded. Tell her I'm sorry. I think she'd rather hear it from you. He gave a faint, almost tired smile. You're right. We stood there a moment longer, the conversation settling into something calmer, less confrontational, more reflective. The tension that had defined most of our relationship felt muted, not gone, but softened by something neither of us could quite name. I meant what I said inside, he added. You should keep the shares. Long term, they'll matter more than the cash. I plan to. He nodded approvingly. Good. Then he stepped back. Take care of yourself. You too. He walked toward his car, pausing once to glance back. His expression wasn't proud exactly, but it held a quiet acknowledgement. Then he drove away. I sat in my car for a moment, the bank book resting on the passenger seat. It looked unchanged, worn edges, faded ink, modest and unassuming. But I knew now it carried decades of quiet intention. On the drive back, I called my grandmother. She answered on the third ring. Hello. Hi, Grandma. Her voice warmed instantly. Sweetheart, did you get home safely? I went to the bank this morning. There was a pause, gentle, not surprised. Oh, she said softly. They told me about the account. Another pause. I could hear her breathing. I hoped they would, she replied. Why didn't you tell me? I wanted you to see it the way I did, as something small, something easy to overlook. She laughed lightly. People show their hearts when they think something is worthless. I thought about my father's words on the ice. "I'm sorry about yesterday," I said. "You don't need to be," she replied. "I watched you pick it up. That was enough." My throat tightened. "It's more than enough, Grandma. It's a lot." "I know," she said gently, "but that's not the important part." "What is?" "That you have something no one can diminish, something built quietly, like you did." I smiled. "I'm going to keep the shares, long term." "Good," she said. "Patience grows." We talked a few more minutes about the wedding, about Daniel, about the drive home. When we hung up, I felt lighter than I had in years. That evening, I returned to the skating pavilion. The staff were dismantling decorations, stacking chairs, rolling up the white mats. The ice looked dull without the lights. I walked to the spot where the bank book had slid. For a moment, I just stood there, remembering the sound of it scraping across the surface, the laughter, the silence afterward. Then I opened the book again. The pages fluttered slightly in the cold air. It still looked like nothing. And maybe that was the point. The quietest things my grandmother wrote often grow the longest. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told something you valued was worthless, take a moment and share your thoughts below. I'd love to know where you're listening from and whether you've ever seen a quiet act change everything. Stories like this remind us that patience, kindness, and dignity don't always look powerful at first, but they endure. We share new stories every day, so if you want more moments like this, consider subscribing and joining us on this journey.